One day, a colossal tower materialized in the heart of the city, heralding what many believed to be the end of the world. Some called it the apocalypse, others labeled it a catastrophe, but while debates raged on, the tower itself spoke, sending a message to humanity. It beckoned those willing to fight to answer its summons, offering a grim ultimatum: respond, or face annihilation. A select few, brave or desperate enough to heed the call, took up the challenge. These individuals, later known as Tower Walkers, were prepared to sacrifice everything for the survival of humanity. However, the tower had not called them in vain. No sooner had they responded than a horde of monsters surged forth from its depths, intent on crushing the walkers before they could even begin their ascent. But amidst the chaos, one man stood tall. His determination to survive was unshakable, and with a single, decisive blow, he brought down the creatures that sought to destroy them. In the aftermath of the battle, the walkers discovered a mysterious artifact left behind by the slain monsters, a regression stone. This stone held incredible power, offering a way to rewind time, sending its user back to the moment the tower first appeared, with their memories fully intact. Intriguingly, the stone could also be divided and shared among the group. The man who claimed the regression stone was eager to test its abilities. As he activated the stone, it burst into a radiant light, so bright that the other tower walkers shielded their eyes. When the light subsided, the man was gone. His companions were left in awe, unsure whether he had succeeded in traveling back in time or had simply vanished into oblivion. Their doubts were soon replaced by panic as the tower unleashed another wave of monsters, catching the remaining walkers off guard. Wounded and terrified, they realized the gravity of their situation. One by one, they made the difficult decision to use their fragments of the regression stone, choosing to escape the immediate danger and return to the past. The constant dread of death weighed heavily on them, making the option of a fresh start seem far more appealing than continuing their ascent. As they reappeared in the familiar surroundings of the dungeon's entrance, more tower walkers began to arrive, having made the same choice. One of them sighed in relief, noting how the group had dwindled. Another grimly observed that they might be among the last ones still willing to face the tower's perils head-on. With the knowledge of what awaited them, they steeled themselves for the inevitable challenges that lay ahead, now armed with the bitter experience of their first encounter. The chance to turn back time offered them the opportunity to correct their deepest regrets and reverse their most devastating failures. However, just as they began to embrace this second chance, a powerful monster suddenly materialized. Without hesitation, the group attacked, managing to bring the beast down after a fierce battle. Once the dust settled, Jae-hwan, catching his breath, called out to his companion, Yunwan, telling him to leave the battlefield. When no response came, Jae-hwan turned to check on him and was horrified by the sight before him. Yunwan was slumped against a pillar, gravely injured, clutching the regression stone in his trembling hand. Rushing to his side, Jae-hwan stood beside his comrade, a sinking feeling settling in his chest. "Did you use it?" he asked, his voice barely steady. Yunwan, with a weak smile, apologized. Although many of their comrades had opted to return to the past, few had considered the consequences of abandoning the world they left behind. Before Jae-hwan could process his emotions, an ominous rumble echoed through the air, and a massive door began to creak open before them. Jae-hwan, stunned by the sight, hesitated as he crossed the threshold. He couldn't shake the growing sense of finality and wondered if this was the point of no return. As soon as he entered, a disembodied voice echoed through the chamber, praising him for his determination. "You are quite extraordinary, Jae-hwan. No one has ever attempted to reach the 99th floor of the tower alone." His eyes darted around, searching for the source of the voice, but his attention was soon drawn to the enormous creature looming ahead, the guardian of the 99th floor. He questioned whether this would be the end for him, whether he would get the chance to return to the past once more. But without hesitation, he gripped his sword, ready to face whatever lay ahead. With a surge of confidence, he vowed to continue climbing the tower, no matter the odds. Meanwhile, within the depths of the Nightmare Tower, the Demon Lord, ruler of this twisted realm, watched a recording of Jae-hwan and his team battling the monster. A sinister grin spread across his face as he observed Jae-hwan's skill and tenacity. "I'm about to acquire something valuable," the demon muttered, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. Back in the past, few moments before the towers appeared, the man casually reached for a packet of chips while listening to the latest news broadcast about the unusual weather conditions caused by a recent surge of yellow dust. As he fumbled with the packet, it tore open unexpectedly, sending chips scattering across the floor. Startled, he looked up, only to meet the curious eyes of a little girl beside him. "Did you steal those chips?" she asked innocently, her eyes narrowing as if she suspected him of foul play. She loved those chips, and her tone reflected her disappointment. Quickly, the protagonist knelt to pick up the spilled chips, offering a flustered explanation. No, it wasn't me. The packet was already opened, he said, trying to reassure her as he gathered the crumbs. Just as he was about to calm the situation, the news anchor on TV suddenly broke into a serious report, advising the public to avoid outdoor activities due to worsening air quality. The man's attention shifted to the screen, and his expression tightened. A breaking news headline flashed across, drawing him in. Whatever was happening, it demanded his full attention. The news reported that a minor earthquake had struck just outside Seoul. Though there were no casualties, experts warned that the tremors were intensifying with each passing moment. Seismologists cautioned the public, urging immediate preventative measures as the likelihood of a larger quake increased. As the protagonist listened, the floor beneath him began to tremble. Alarmed, he glanced outside, paying closer attention to the news. Around him, other shoppers were also growing uneasy, glancing at each other as the vibrations continued to escalate. Suddenly, the government issued emergency warnings, announcing strict precautions to prevent casualties in response to the tremors. The situation took a drastic turn when, outside the mart, the ground shook violently, sending a ripple of panic through the crowd. Amidst the chaos, the earth split open, and an enormous tower erupted from beneath, its towering structure looming ominously over the city. People gasped in terror, their fear quickly turning into screams as they tried to comprehend what was happening. In the midst of the pandemonium, the protagonist instinctively pulled the little girl close, shielding her from the falling debris. Overwhelmed by the destruction around her, the child began to sob uncontrollably, her small frame shaking with fear. The once familiar mart had been reduced to rubble, its structure completely devastated by the quake. Nearby, a man called out, checking if anyone was hurt. He reassured the survivors that emergency services had been contacted and that help was on the way. Turning his attention back to the little girl in his arms, the protagonist gently asked if she was all right. Her tear-filled eyes gazed up at him, and with a small nod, she whispered that she was fine. Then, with a shaky voice, she asked about the tower that had suddenly appeared outside the shattered mart. "What is that?" she asked, her voice filled with confusion and fear as she looked at the colossal structure dominating the skyline. Meanwhile, reports started flooding in from around the globe. Towers identical to the one in Seoul had appeared in major cities like London and Tokyo. These massive, mysterious structures seemed to rise out of nowhere, leaving the world in shock. As people struggled to comprehend the situation, the name Nightmare Towers began circulating, describing the unsettling nature of these giant monuments that had thrust the world into a state of terror. They all received the same message, congratulating them for being chosen to become tower walkers, tasked with saving the world. Each was given a choice: accept the call and face the unknown, or refuse and remain a bystander. The man, without fully understanding what it meant to be a tower walker, decided to accept. However, his curiosity quickly turned into disbelief as the truth unfolded before him. Those who responded to the tower's summons were equipped for battle by a strange system interface, which granted them weapons and abilities, much like characters in a video game. However, it didn't take long for them to realize this was no game, it was real, and the stakes were life and death. As they processed what was happening, a sudden alert appeared on their screens, warning them that a towering impact was about to hit their world. Their shock deepened as they watched live footage of people outside the tower, construction workers who had been obliviously going about their tasks. The workers had noticed a figure perched on one of the tower's doors and, at first, mistook it for a person. Concerned for the individual's safety, they called out, warning them to get down from the dangerous height, and even asked someone nearby to call 911. But their concern quickly turned to horror. The figure revealed itself to be no human, it was a monster. Its wings unfurled, its grotesque claws extended, and its mouth opened, exposing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. The creature let out an ear-splitting roar that echoed through the city. Before anyone could react, the monster, which was evidently a boss of some kind, summoned an army of goblins and other grotesque creatures that appeared behind it, charging straight at the helpless workers and bystanders. This was the tower impact, when monsters spill from the tower into the world, wreaking havoc. Alarms blared across the city as chaos erupted. The creatures swarmed the streets, destroying everything in their path as people scrambled to flee for their lives. The military was dispatched quickly. Tanks rolled into the area, their cannons aimed at the monsters. However, despite their efforts, the sheer number of creatures overwhelmed them. The monsters were relentless, spreading like wildfire across the city. No matter how many were killed, more seemed to emerge from the tower's dark portals, making it nearly impossible to regain control of the situation. Panic gripped the city as the tower walkers, now realizing the gravity of their new roles, prepared to face this monstrous invasion. They were humanity's last hope, standing between the world and complete destruction. In the aftermath of the monster invasion, a devastating third of the global population was wiped out. Those watching from the tower were powerless, forced to witness the destruction unfold below. The memory of the message they had received haunted them, reminding them that they were meant to be the ones to save the world, the Tower Walkers. Shocked and overwhelmed, they couldn't shake the weight of their mission. Determined to make a difference, the Tower Walkers resolved to ascend the tower. Despite the staggering odds, they clung to the hope that their only way to end this nightmare was to conquer the tower itself. If this is what we have to do to save the world, then let's do it, they thought. Armed with extraordinary abilities and weapons, they pressed forward, fully aware that they were humanity's last defense against complete annihilation. As they ascended higher, they faced formidable monsters, defeating each one with growing confidence. Eventually, they reached a massive stone blocking their path, its immense size sealing off the entrance to the next level. Frustration settled in as some of them doubted their ability to break through, but one among them insisted that they could smash their way past it. His optimism seemed foolish to others at first. This was no ordinary obstacle. Still, with little choice, they decided to try. To their astonishment, their efforts worked. Using their weapons, they chipped away at the boulder, clearing a path forward. As the dust settled, one of the tower walkers noticed something sparkling within the rubble. He called over his senior, pointing to the mysterious item glowing beneath the debris. Intrigued, they carefully examined the shimmering object and were stunned to discover that it was a powerful artifact, the regression stone. Its ability to turn back time left them in awe. The thought of undoing their mistakes and preventing the destruction they had witnessed seemed almost too good to be true. Their leader, Incan Huang, gathered everyone together, his expression serious. He proposed that he would use the stone first and report back on what happened. The others agreed, their curiosity and hope growing. With a determined look, Incan prepared to activate the regression stone, ready to test its power and potentially rewrite the fate of the world. In a blinding flash of light, their leader vanished before their eyes, leaving them in stunned disbelief. They couldn't wrap their minds around what had just happened. Incan Huang had completely disappeared. Although they knew the regression stone had sent him back in time, the group still found it hard to accept that he was no longer present with them. Many of them hoped he would return soon, unable to fathom the idea of their leader being truly gone. Sakamoto, a former science teacher, adjusted his glasses and calmly analyzed the situation. He explained that Incan Huang wouldn't be returning to their timeline, at least not in the way they expected. According to Sakamoto, the moment Incan activated the regression stone, their timeline had split into a parallel one, separating their worlds forever. Sakamoto, drawing on theories of the multiverse and parallel dimensions, reasoned that once Incan went back in time, their paths diverged completely, and they would never meet him again. His explanation left the group bewildered. The complexity of the science behind it went over their heads, evident in their confused expressions. Sakamoto noticed their puzzlement and reassured them, saying that whether they fully understood it or not, one thing was clear: Incan had successfully traveled back in time. But despite his journey to the past, their present remained unchanged. The timeline they were in would still face the threat of destruction. Sakamoto continued, stating that although he trusted the tower's items, and the regression stone had certainly worked, there was no guarantee that each person using it would end up in same timelines. It was possible, though unconfirmed, that those who used the regression stone might land in the same timeline. The truth was, they couldn't be certain about anything when it came to the mysterious items from the tower. Everything about them defied logic and their understanding of reality. As they processed this unsettling information, a second tower impact struck the outside world. Monsters poured forth once more, wreaking havoc as they sought to wipe out the remaining pockets of humanity. Chaos reigned outside the tower, and the world teetered on the brink of collapse as the tower walkers contemplated their next move in the face of this ongoing catastrophe. The tower walkers were faced with an impossible decision: either use the regression stone to escape to the past or stay and face certain death. The situation inside the tower had devolved into absolute chaos, with destruction spreading everywhere and the monsters mercilessly slaughtering those who tried to fight them. Cries for help echoed through the chambers, but hope was all but extinguished. One of the tower walkers, already feeling the weight of defeat, accepted that their end was near. His companion agreed, believing that their lives were as good as over. Seeing no other way, one of them apologized to the remaining fighters and, with a heavy heart, used the regression stone to travel back in time, leaving the others behind. The last tower walker, left alone, knelt before the towering monster, prepared to be consumed by it. Just when he thought his fate was sealed, a man armed with dual daggers appeared out of nowhere. With swift and precise strikes, he took down the beast. The tower walker, shocked and unable to comprehend what had just happened, stared at the mysterious fighter. The man turned, smiled, and asked if he was all right. Barely able to respond, the tower walker nodded, still in disbelief. Looking around, he realized that his former companions had abandoned him. Anger and frustration surged through him as he cursed them for leaving him behind. But his anger faded when his new team arrived, rescuing him from the brink of death. With tears in his eyes, he thanked them for saving his life, while they commended him for his courage in standing his ground. These tower walkers, who had resisted the temptation of the regression stone, were now the last hope for humanity. Unlike those who had fled to the past, they chose to fight for the present, determined to put an end to the nightmare and protect what was left of the world. Later, Yunhuan lay on the ground, panting and struggling to take his final breaths. His vision blurred as he could barely make out Jaehuan's face above him. Nearby, Jaehuan was slumped against a wall, grievously wounded, questioning how everything had gone so wrong. His mind drifted back to the moment when he and Yunhuan had defeated a monster together, but the memory was tainted by the image of the same monster launching a vicious attack on Yunhuan. Yunhuan, realizing the danger they were in, charged at the monstrous beast to divert its attention. He shouted for Jaehuan to strike while the creature was distracted. Without hesitation, Jaehuan leaped from above, reassuring his companion that he was fully prepared for the battle. Gripping his sword tightly, he swung down with precision and declared it was the monster's end. With a swift, powerful strike, he cleanly severed the creature's head, bringing it down in one decisive blow. After the battle, Jaehuan quickly checked on his comrades, asking if there had been any casualties. Thankfully, Yunhuan reported that, this time, no one had perished. He added that the injured fighters would recover soon with some rest. Feeling optimistic, Yunhuan remarked that if they could continue like this, they might actually reach the final floor of the tower. Together, they made their way back to where the rest of the group had gathered. The healer was tending to the wounded, and upon seeing Jaehuan and Yunhuan return, their fellow tower walkers waved at them in relief. Both men waved back, feeling a sense of camaraderie and victory. As they settled in, Jaehuan's gaze was drawn to an unfamiliar sword lying on the ground. Curious, he approached it and examined its details. The weapon was named Wormsbane, a blade sharpened for 1,000 days and nights by Beongwei, the guardian of the 85th floor. It had been crafted specifically to slay dragons and was imbued with the power of both the sun and the moon. Delighted by this unexpected treasure, Jaehuan picked up the sword, feeling confident that it would greatly enhance their chances of survival. He remembered what Yunhuan had said about finding stronger weapons and felt more certain than ever that they could conquer the final floors. Everything seemed to be falling into place, and for a moment, the group dared to believe they might actually complete the climb. But as Jaehuan stood in the chamber of hellfire on the 98th floor, all hope began to slip away. He gazed in horror at the monstrous beast before him, a towering creature capable of unleashing torrents of molten lava that consumed everything in its path. His companions had already fallen, burned alive by the scorching heat. The monster's flames were so intense they melted metal weapons within seconds. Jaehuan stood frozen, alone, realizing the gravity of the situation and wondering how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. The protagonist, still reeling from the shock of seeing his comrades fall, was suddenly assaulted by the monster, its sheer force hurling him violently against the wall. The impact was brutal, knocking the wind out of him and causing blood to spill from his mouth. Dizzy and disoriented, he slumped to the ground, overwhelmed by the crushing weight of defeat. In that moment, the grim reality hit him: everything they had fought for, all the sacrifices and struggles climbing the tower together, now seemed utterly meaningless. The hope they had clung to, the belief that they could save the world, felt like a cruel joke as the monster loomed closer. Paralyzed, the protagonist watched in terror as the creature opened its gaping maw, preparing to unleash a torrent of molten lava. For the first time, he felt completely helpless. But just as the beast was about to strike, Yunhuan appeared out of nowhere, launching a flurry of attacks against the monster, desperately trying to fend it off. Yunhuan called out to the protagonist, snapping him back to awareness. Realizing his comrade was in grave danger, the protagonist leaped to his feet, rushing forward to help. Yunhuan fought valiantly, but the monster was relentless. Despite his efforts, he was struck by the creature's sharp horn, sending him crashing to the ground. Seeing his comrade injured infuriated the protagonist, filling him with a fiery determination to protect Yunhuan at all costs. The monster, now carrying Yunhuan's limp body, tried to flee, but the protagonist was not about to let it escape. Grabbing his sword, he charged after the beast. As he ran, something extraordinary happened. A glowing string of light extended from his sword, wrapping itself around the monster's horn. The protagonist was momentarily stunned, unsure of what this strange light was or how it had come to be. But there was no time to ponder. his priority was taking down the monster. With renewed vigor, the protagonist tightened his grip on the sword and pulled, dragging the creature back toward him. The struggle was fierce, but after a series of calculated strikes, he finally managed to bring the monster down. Exhausted but victorious, he rushed to Yunwan's side. The wounds Yunwan sustained were deep, and the protagonist's heart sank as he saw the regression stone clutched tightly in Yunwan's hand. Shocked, he asked what his friend was planning to do with it. Yunwan, his voice weak, simply apologized. Despite the grim atmosphere in the tower, Yunwan Kim always carried a cheerful demeanor, earning him the nickname Smiling Knight from his fellow tower walkers. His positive energy was a source of comfort for everyone around him, but for the first time, that signature smile was gone. The weight of their dire situation had finally broken through his optimism. The protagonist, sensing Yunwan's internal struggle, urged him to leave, telling him to go before he changed his mind. Yunwan hesitated, shocked that the protagonist had noticed the regression stone he was holding. It was as if his intentions had been laid bare, and the reality of his cowardice hit him hard. With a weary sigh and his body barely holding up, he turned to go. As he ascended the staircase, a bittersweet feeling washed over him. He realized how strong Jae-hwan had become, far stronger than he had anticipated. If anyone could make it to the top of this cursed tower, it would be Jae-hwan. That thought gave Yunwan some peace, knowing that even if he couldn't continue, the world had someone capable of saving it. Reaching the top of the stairs, Yunwan jumped out of a nearby window, his thoughts heavy with guilt and admiration. Meanwhile, the protagonist arrived at the next floor, placing his hand on the stone door to begin the next stage of his battle. Memories of his fallen comrades flashed in his mind, giving him the resolve to keep going. As the door creaked open, he was taken aback. The floor was encased in solid stone, a barren and unwelcoming place. Undeterred, he continued his ascent and found himself on the 99th floor. An intense gust of wind greeted him as he stepped forward, but he pressed on. The floor's guardian, a colossal ice monster, attacked him relentlessly. Despite the harsh conditions and numerous assaults, the protagonist dodged the creature's strikes, refusing to back down. The ice monster sneered, impressed that the rat-like human had the audacity to keep going. Covered in snow and frost, the protagonist remained determined, taunting the monster, asking if it was tired of their fight yet. In response, the creature lunged at him once more, its attacks filled with icy fury. Later, the protagonist found temporary refuge in an ice cave, desperately trying to stay out of the monster's sight. He stuffed a piece of cloth into his mouth to muffle his breathing while using whatever warmth he could muster to thaw the ice that had formed on his arm. Outside, the creature prowled, its booming voice echoing as it mocked him. Hiding again? How predictable, it rumbled, thinking the protagonist's efforts to stay alive were futile. But Jae-hwan wasn't ready to give up, not yet. Jae-hwan huddled inside the icy cave, his heart pounding as he strained to stay hidden from the looming threat outside. He wasn't in any shape to face the creature yet, he needed time to recover. It had been a decade since he first set foot on the 99th floor, and the danger here was on a completely different level compared to anything he'd encountered before. The trials of the 98th floor, though brutal, paled in comparison to what awaited him now. The floor's guardian, Frostworm Velchisis, the ice dragon from the Forgotten Land, was a terrifying force. Its freezing breath could penetrate even the strongest cold resistance, making it almost impossible to endure. Jae-hwan knew that if it weren't for the gear left behind by tower walkers who had either fallen or retreated, he wouldn't have survived this long. The suppressing dragon sword, a relic from the 85th floor, had saved his life more times than he could count. His ice demon armor, gifted by Yoon Aikwan, and the Flame King's bracelet from Han Seo-yeol were his final lifelines. As he gazed at the bracelet on his wrist, memories of Han Seo-yeol flooded his mind. He closed his eyes, feeling her presence lingering around him, and whispered an apology. He blamed himself for not being more decisive back then, believing that if he had acted more swiftly, he could have saved her when she was attacked. The guilt gnawed at him, even after all these years. His thoughts drifted to a time in the reclaimed village of Adipose, a settlement they had secured after defeating the 50th floor boss, Altaminus. There, he'd spent time healing and reflecting on his journey. One day, while deep in thought, he had been interrupted by Jay, the village's blacksmith. Planning to challenge it again? Jay had asked, a knowing look in his eyes. Jae-hwan had nodded. This time, for sure, he had replied, sipping the tea Jay had made for him, a warmth spreading through his weary body. Jay had been relieved to hear it. Despite the daily influx of injured or fallen walkers, the village had never lost hope. They had forged a community out of the chaos, and the priests had even set up emergency rescue teams for those too wounded to continue. The blacksmiths of Oedipus had long dedicated themselves to crafting gear for the tower walkers, forging weapons and armor without asking for a single coin in return, all for the sake of humanity's survival. But those days seemed to be slipping away. Jae-hwan, now seated across from Jae, the last remaining blacksmith in the village, couldn't help but notice the emptiness of the workshop. Jae was sharpening a blade, his hand steady but his expression tired. "You're the only one left now, aren't you?" Jae-hwan asked, a hint of sadness in his voice. Jae grimaced, clearly not wanting to be reminded. "You've been my only customer for a while," Jae muttered, glancing up from his work. "And it's not like there's much I can make anymore. Supplies from the lower floors have stopped coming. No more ores. A few months ago, I could still scrounge up some minerals, but now, it's all dried up." Jae-hwan nodded, not surprised by the news. The tower had nearly claimed the entirety of humanity. He wasn't sure how long it had been, he had lost track of time, but he was certain more than 10 tower impacts had occurred since he began his climb. From some point onward, new walkers had ceased to appear on the lower floors. It was as if Earth itself had been wiped out, leaving no one left to ascend the tower. "Do you think there's anyone left on Earth?" Jae-hwan asked quietly, his eyes meeting Jae's. Jae paused, then shrugged. "Who knows? But it's strange, isn't it? Even though the tower's the same as always, doesn't it feel different?" Jae-hwan frowned, suddenly recalling something odd he had seen during his last journey up the tower. "Now that you mention it, I did notice something," he admitted. "There were strange scribbles near the place where I found a returned stone. Words that didn't make sense, something about a tower within a tower, and a nightmare within a nightmare." Jae's hammer halted mid-strike as he stared at Jae-hwan, clearly disturbed by the revelation. "What does that even mean?" he muttered. "I have no idea," Jae-hwan replied, shaking his head. "At first, I thought it was just someone's random scrawls, but now, I'm not so sure." Before Jae-hwan could dwell on it further, Jae mentioned something else that made his stomach drop. "Grandmother Hylene disappeared 2 days ago," Jae said, his voice tinged with concern. "No one's seen her since." Jae-hwan stiffened. Everyone knew that people in the tower didn't age, so there were only 2 possibilities for someone disappearing: either they had used a regression stone or they had jumped off the tower. Neither option boded well for Hylene. She and Jae were among the few support-type walkers left in Oedipus, and losing her would be a heavy blow. Jae's hammer struck the anvil with a loud clang as he seemed to lose himself in thought, his worry for the missing grandmother evident. Jae-hwan sat in silence for a moment, contemplating what to do. After a long pause, he turned to Jae with a firm resolve in his eyes. "Teach me the blacksmithing skill," Jae-hwan said suddenly. Jae froze, shocked by the request. "What?" he asked, bewildered. "I want to learn how to forge weapons," Jae-hwan repeated. "I don't know how much longer we have, and I can't rely on others for this. If supplies are running out and people are disappearing, I need to know how to make my own weapons. Teach me." Jae stared at him, still in disbelief, before slowly nodding. "You're serious, huh?" he said with a sigh. "All right then. But don't expect it to be easy." Jae-hwan smiled faintly. "Nothing in this tower ever is." Jae-hwan returned to the 99th floor, where the massive ice dragon, Velchicus, awaited him. As soon as he appeared, Velchicus let out a low, rumbling chuckle. "Are you done with your little game of hide-and-seek, human?" the dragon taunted. His voice echoed across the frozen expanse, sharp like the frost in the air. "No human has ever reached this floor alone since the tower was created. Yet, here you are, by yourself." Velchicus' icy eyes narrowed in amusement. "You are truly remarkable, Jae-hwan." A smirk tugged at the corner of Jae-hwan's lips. "Funny," he mused, his voice laced with sarcasm. "The only thing to acknowledge me isn't even human. Go figure." He stared at the massive beast, a sense of emptiness washing over him. "Killing you will probably leave me feeling hollow, though. You're the only one left who recognizes my strength." Velchicus paused, surprised at the human's words. "You are mistaken, Jae-hwan," the dragon replied. "A mere human like you cannot possibly defeat me alone." But Jae-hwan was undeterred. He gripped his sword tighter, the cold steel glinting in the dim light of the frozen chamber. "Is that so?" Jae-hwan asked, a fierce confidence burning in his eyes. "Then explain why you're so certain of your victory." He motioned to his armor, once pristine but now showing signs of wear. Cracks ran along the surface, thin fissures that threatened to break apart at any moment. The sight of it made Velchicus roar in anger, realizing how close this arrogant human had pushed him. "Enough of this!" Velchicus bellowed. "No more games." The dragon reared back, opening its massive jaws. A torrent of icy breath gathered in his throat, preparing to unleash it upon Jae-hwan. But the protagonist didn't flinch. He sprinted toward the beast, his sword gleaming as he aimed for the dragon's mouth. The battle was fierce. Blood dripped from the wounds inflicted by the ice spikes that had lashed across Jaewon's arm, but he continued to fight. Velchis, watching his opponent's persistence, shook his head in disbelief. Why do you continue, human? Your fate is sealed. Even if you survive this fight, what awaits you is only solitude and emptiness. There is nothing left for you beyond this floor. As the dragon spoke, the ice surrounding the battlefield began to shift. From within the crystals, arms of frozen figures reached out toward Jaewon, as if calling to him. Faces formed in the ice, faces twisted in sorrow, tears frozen on their cheeks. Jaewon's expression darkened. You talk too much, he growled, and with a swift, decisive strike, he shattered the ice figures that tried to hold him back. The shards of ice scattered around him as he broke free, rushing forward to confront Velchis once again. With renewed fury, Jaewon pressed on, charging toward the dragon with a relentless determination. His eyes locked on his foe, and in that moment, nothing else mattered but the strike that would end this battle. After their back and forth, the dragon Velchis was stunned to see yet another powerful thrust from Jaewon. With a haughty tone, Velchis scoffed, "Is that all you've got? Give it up. You can't bring me down with that skill alone." Jaewon, however, wasn't about to give up. He charged forward, determined to defeat the dragon. Unlike others, he had started his climb later, meaning he missed many hidden skills and rare classes along the way. Accepting this, he chose to specialize in just one technique, the thrust. And he had perfected it. His relentless focus allowed him to refine this one attack to an almost unimaginable degree. After slaying over 50 million monsters with his thrust, it had become a part of him. His companions often joked that thrust was his true name, and some even wondered if he had been a wasp in a previous life. Jaewon felt something changing within him. His thrusts were becoming faster, more precise, and far stronger. His relentless training had transformed the thrust from a mere motion into a lethal force, a power that now rivaled hidden skills. He felt no fatigue using it, as it didn't drain any spirit power, it was pure physical prowess. Still, despite his mastery, this opponent was no ordinary foe. Even with countless strikes, he had only managed to scratch the dragon. Velchis opened his jaws, preparing to unleash his devastating breath attack. Jaewon's instinct screamed at him that it was too late to dodge. But then, unexpectedly, a shimmering light shot out and wrapped around the dragon's mouth, binding it tightly. Jaewon recognized the glow. It was the same light he had seen on the 98th floor when it restrained that boss's horn. With this opportunity, he gripped his sword with both hands and launched himself at Velchis. Jaewon struck with all his might, slicing into the dragon's mouth, then swiftly withdrew. The dragon staggered back, momentarily stunned, while Jaewon assessed the damage. He had expected his strike to shatter the dragon's jaw completely, but Velchis remained defiant, his fierce eyes blazing with fury. "Impressive, human, but don't get carried away after a lucky blow," Velchis sneered, his voice thick with anger. He prepared to retaliate, intent on ending the fight for good. But Jaewon was ready to press on, knowing he had only begun to show the true extent of his power. The dragon soared into the air, taking a deep inhale before unleashing a torrent of icy breath toward Jaewon. He dodged skillfully, evading each attack, but the dragon's strikes intensified, blanketing the mid-air space and making it nearly impossible to avoid. Realizing that he couldn't keep this up much longer, Jaewon stumbled as he scrambled to get away. The ice dragon loomed over him, chuckling. "Too bad for you," it said. "If only there were 10 more humans like you, maybe you'd have had a chance." Jaewon grit his teeth in frustration. "Enough with the gloating," he snarled, eyeing the dragon's dangling chin. "You can barely hold yourself together?" But the dragon's gaze darkened as it spoke again. "Had your kind not been deceived by the dream demon stone, you wouldn't be in this pitiful state. A shame humans don't know of it." Jaewon's eyes widened at the mention of the dream demon stone. "What do you mean by that?" he demanded. But Velchis remained silent, unleashing another barrage of attacks. Seizing his moment, Jaewon darted toward the gate and slipped through just in time, collapsing against the door, gasping for air. One claw swipe away from death, he was relieved to have escaped. In the aftermath, he couldn't shake off the dragon's words. Dream Demon Stone? What did it mean, and why had the dragon mentioned it? 5 years passed on the 99th floor. Eventually, Jaewon stood victorious over Velchis, receiving a flood of notifications as his efforts paid off. He had earned the title of the 99th floor Nightmare, with his level and attributes, stamina, martial ability, and dexterity, all maxed out. Sitting atop the defeated dragon's body, he sighed, scrolling through the myriad of pop-ups filling his vision. As Velchis' form began to dissipate, leaving behind only a few drops of blood and an item, Jaewon leaned in and asked once more, "What did you mean about the Dream Demon Stone?" The dragon's fading eyes met his. "You already know the answer, human. The truth awaits you at the final floor, it replied, before fading into nothingness. Jaehwan glanced at the item dropped by Velchis, examining it closely. The item's description revealed it was the Ice Dragon sword, imbued with Velchis' chilling breath. It would only reveal its blade when its wielder's fighting spirit was ignited. Though it was supposed to be a sword, it looked more like a dagger to him. As he held it, the dragon's blood suddenly floated up, coalescing to form a pathway. Startled, Jaehwan looked ahead and saw a massive door with the number 100 emblazoned on top. This had to be the final floor. Steeling himself, he entered. But as soon as he passed through, the number on the door morphed, revealing a new title, Control Room. The change sent a chill down his spine. As he ventured deeper into the chamber, he was confronted by a massive screen displaying images of grandmother Hylene, their shops, and a panoramic view of the tower. He could see everything from the summoning grounds to Adipose. Jaehwan was stunned. Was this how the tower appeared now? Suddenly, an unfamiliar voice echoed behind him, musing aloud at how quickly Jaehwan had arrived. The speaker expressed surprise, assuming Jaehwan would have returned to the village first. Alarmed, Jaehwan whirled around, sword in hand, only to find himself alone. The disembodied voice chuckled, assuring him there was no need for alarm. Apologizing for the unexpected intrusion, the voice explained that it had neglected to broadcast an essential message. It invited him to relax, acknowledging the control room's appearance might be deceiving. Though grand on the outside, it was quite antique and finicky to operate. Then, a notification flashed before Jaehwan, congratulating him on clearing one of World 294's tutorial games. The message informed him that his feat was inscribed into the undying Akashic records, a record only accessible to the monarchs of the Great Land. Jaehwan's achievements would be remembered, and his heart raced at the thought of what awaited him next. Jaehwan stared at the message, utterly dumbfounded. Tutorial? He wondered, struggling to grasp its meaning. Memories of his fallen comrades flashed before his eyes, and a chilling thought crossed his mind: if this was just a tutorial, what would the real challenge look like? The shock was so intense that he almost lost his footing. Just then, a figure materialized before him. The imposing creature, a towering beast with the face of a lion, observed Jaehwan with a mixture of amusement and pity. Was that revelation too much to handle? The creature asked, sounding almost apologetic. I know it's a lot to process, but I didn't want you spiraling into despair. For a mere human, you've done quite well. The monster looked surprised, though, as he noticed Jaehwan's expression shift from shock to defiance far sooner than expected. Jaehwan had recovered quickly, and his gaze was now fixed on the beast, burning with questions. Who are you? Jaehwan demanded, his voice laced with anger. And what's with all this nonsense? The creature chuckled, clearly delighted by Jaehwan's resilience. Forgive my excitement, he said. I haven't even introduced myself. I'm Beastrain, the devil, and the master of the Tower of Nightmares that you've just conquered. I never expected a human to reach the 100th floor alone. It's unprecedented. Jaehwan's mind raced with questions. You said this was a tutorial. Does that mean the real game hasn't even begun? Beastrain smirked, impressed by Jaehwan's quick grasp of the situation. Indeed, you're quick to understand, he replied. But before I explain further, there's something I want you to see. With a flick of Beastrain's finger, multiple screens appeared, displaying scenes from various tower climbers. One clip after another showed people's first steps into the tower, their expressions ranging from awe to fear. Jaehwan watched as the scenes shifted, recognizing familiar faces. There was Seo Yul, looking bewildered as he first encountered the tower's door, and Yun Huan, suggesting that they'd be better off as a team of 3. Another video appeared, showing Jaehwan himself, standing among fellow walkers and introducing himself. I'm Jaehwan, from Seoul, Korea, he had said, holding his sword with a hint of pride. Beastrain glanced at Jaehwan, his tone almost nostalgic. They looked so full of hope, didn't they? Those early days are something else. The sight of his comrades as they had once been, alive, eager, and ready, made Jaehwan's heart clench. Beastrain was visibly moved as he watched the faces of those long gone flicker across the screen. He seemed almost nostalgic, his gaze lingering on the ambush scenes, where monsters had descended upon Jaehwan and his allies. A particular gleam lit up Beastrain's eyes as the video of Seo Yul appeared, capturing the moment she had called out to Jaehwan. He mused that they hadn't anticipated what was coming next, a revelation as chilling as it was tragic. Then, the screen transitioned to a gut-wrenching scene, Seo Yul lying motionless, Jaehwan cradling her, tears streaming down his face as he pleaded with her to open her eyes. Beastrain's face was filled with a perverse kind of satisfaction. Tragic, isn't it? He murmured, his voice betraying a hint of amusement. I must admit, I cried too when I first saw that. As the video continued, showing Yun Huan's tearful apology to Jaehwan, Beast Rain turned to him, his expression almost taunting. So, do you remember them now? All those faces, all that pain. Do you feel anger? Sadness? Regret? He asked, his tone filled with mock sympathy. I know these feelings can seem pointless in the face of the past, but I'm willing to give you a chance. Jaehwan raised his head, disbelief and confusion plain on his face. Beast Rain's wicked grin widened. What if you could start over, he proposed. Imagine it, a fresh beginning, but this time, you'd have all your current memories intact. A grand opportunity, don't you think? Beast Rain's head circled Jaehwan, a smug confidence radiating from him. This isn't the stuff of your world's novels, he declared. I'm offering you the chance to become the absolute being who could begin this game anew. Jaehwan was floored, feeling a hollow realization settle in his chest. Wasn't it supposed to be over? He'd conquered the tower, yet now it felt as if everything had been for nothing. Then, another notification appeared on his screen, its message as jarring as it was cruel. Congratulations. You've been chosen as a tower walker to save the world. Do you accept the summons? It hit him like a bolt of lightning. He had been deceived all along. The tower, this endless climb, none of it had been about saving humanity. The truth was grimmer than he could have imagined. There was never any real hope of halting the tower's impact on the world. All he could do was continue climbing, battling, endlessly, in the hollow pursuit of a salvation that had been nothing more than a cruel illusion from the start. Jaehwan looked at Beast Rain and declared with certainty that he had no intention of going back to the past. Beast Rain chuckled, his laughter echoing through the chamber. Ah, still caught up on that, are we? He sneered. Let's get one thing straight, there's no such item here in the tower, or anywhere else for that matter, that can send you back. Any idea to the contrary? Pure illusion. He glanced at Jaehwan with a bemused expression. All those so-called return stones are just tricks? Jaehwan was taken aback. His mind raced back to the words of the ice dragon, Velchasis. If only his race hadn't been fooled by the dream demon stone. The pieces started to come together, and Jaehwan's face paled. He realized the gravity of Beast Rain's words, a sinking feeling in his chest. Beast Rain grinned wider, seeming to relish Jaehwan's confusion. The stone you humans thought could return you to the past? That's the dream demon stone, Beast Rain explained, a tone of mockery in his voice. It doesn't send anyone back. It traps you in an endless cycle of dreams created by the demon within. Your kind has chased after this illusion for eons. Obsessed with going back, unable to accept the present. It's a particularly human flaw. Jaehwan felt a sense of dread, yet he couldn't deny the truth in Beast Rain's words. He's right, he thought. We've always been obsessed with the past. Beast Rain eyed him with a peculiar admiration. Ah, you're more insightful than most. But now that we've cleared up that little misunderstanding, shall we finally begin the real game? A notification appeared before Jaehwan, congratulating him on clearing the transparent tutorial and inquiring if he wished to continue. Beast Rain smirked, evidently confident that Jaehwan would make the logical choice to start over. But Jaehwan's expression hardened. He stood his ground and refused, declaring that he had no desire to participate in this twisted cycle. Beast Rain was caught off guard, his composure faltering for the first time. He blinked in shock as if such a possibility had never occurred to him. Jaehwan offered a small, defiant smile. Thanks to you, I've learned a lot about this tower and its tricks. But you won't be pulling me into your game again? Before Beast Rain could recover, another notification flashed behind him, this time listing the full details of the Tower of Nightmare and Jaehwan's role as a tower walker. The revelation startled Beast Rain, who hadn't anticipated Jaehwan would break free from his grasp so easily. The explanation that followed revealed the Tower of Nightmares was also known as the Stronghold of Regrets, the second creation of the nightmare dream demon, Mulak. Those who agreed to be summoned into the tower were drawn into the dream world fabricated by the dream demon. Jaehwan understood now. He was trapped in the demon's dream, his entire climb through the tower nothing more than an elaborate illusion. But if this was the case, he wanted to confront and defeat the mastermind behind it all, Beast Rain, and move to the next level. Beast Rain sighed, rubbing his temples in exasperation. There is no next level, he muttered. This is the end of the tower. There's nothing beyond this. But Jaehwan didn't believe a word. He knew Beast Rain had lied before, particularly about the world being saved. Beast Rain chuckled, wondering aloud if the reward for clearing the tutorial had been too disappointing for Jaehwan. I can't believe you're pushing forward with those meager memories just for a reward, the devil mocked. Ignoring Beast Rain's taunts, Jaehwan launched an attack straight at the devil's head, which dissolved into nothingness. As his head began to regenerate, Beast Rain laughed again. What do you want? A hidden skill? A rare item? He offered everything Jaehwan could desire, as if it were well within his power to grant such things. But Jae-hwan remained focused, uninterested in anything Beastrain had to offer. Seeing his offer dismissed, Beastrain's grin twisted into a knowing smirk. "Ah, I see. You want to return to your original world, don't you?" The devil said, certain that Jae-hwan must have realized by now that everything, the entire tower, was just a dream within the Tower of Nightmares. There was no actual impact on the real world. Jae-hwan froze, startled by Beastrain's words. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. But before he could process the devil's meaning, his surroundings shifted abruptly. He was no longer in the tower. Instead, he found himself standing in the real world, confused and disoriented. Nearby, a young woman apologized to her friend for being late, explaining that there had been too much traffic. As Jae-hwan turned to look, he heard her ask her companion if he had bought the movie tickets in advance, to which the man replied that he hadn't. The scene felt surreal, yet undeniably real, leaving Jae-hwan in shock, unsure of what had just happened. The girl, visibly irritated, snapped at her friend. "Fine, I'll buy them myself. Just hurry up." Her frustration seemed to echo around Jae-hwan, who stood there, bewildered by the situation. Before he could even gather his thoughts, the world around him shifted again, and suddenly, he found himself on a train. The passengers were all seated comfortably, smiling and chatting, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Beastrain's voice slithered into Jae-hwan's mind. "Starting to realize what's happening, are we?" the devil teased. "Surprising, isn't it? Nobody died in the real world. Your family and friends, they're all alive." The devil grinned as he peeked at the phone of a boy sitting nearby, who was browsing something that even Beastrain found peculiar. The devil paused for a moment, then chuckled. "Oh, how careless of me," he said, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "I almost forgot to show you the most important thing." With a snap of his fingers, the scene shifted once more. Now, Jae-hwan found himself standing in a hospital ward. Doctors and nurses moved briskly from bed to bed, checking on the patients. One doctor inquired about a specific patient's condition, and a nurse responded, "No change, still in a deep sleep." Jae-hwan stepped closer to one of the beds, his heart pounding in his chest. There, lying unconscious, was himself. He stared in disbelief, frozen by the sight of his own body, untouched by time. Beastrain's voice echoed around him again, smug as ever. "Decades have passed for you in the Tower of Nightmares, but in this world, only a month has gone by. Quite the contrast, isn't it?" Jae-hwan's mind reeled at the realization. "So, this was all just a dream," he muttered, trying to process it. Beastrain's laughter cut through his thoughts. "Don't get too comfortable," the devil warned. "You barely scraped through the tutorial, and you think you can beat me? You're no match for me. The difference between us is like the gap between humans and dragons." Jae-hwan smirked, exhaling slowly. "A dragon, huh? That's a relief. I've killed one of those before." The devil's expression twisted in frustration, clearly not expecting such cheek from Jae-hwan. Enraged, Beastrain launched a sudden attack, but Jae-hwan was ready, blocking it effortlessly. The scene shifted again. Jae-hwan found himself back in Ada pose, battered and bruised but alive. He stumbled toward Jae's shop, a bottle of liquor clutched in his hand. He pushed the door open, ready to tell Jae he had returned. But as he looked around, the shop was empty. Jae was nowhere to be found. The entire shop was now covered in thick spider webs, giving off the impression that Jae had abandoned it long ago. Jae-hwan walked in, preparing to mold and modify his sword by himself. Thanks to the skills he had previously learned from Jae, he had been able to maintain his weapon for the past 72 days, relentlessly challenged day after day without a single moment of rest. No matter how many times he attacked the devil, he couldn't leave even a scratch on him. Strangely enough, he hadn't been killed either. He wasn't sure why, but it seemed the Beastrain had no intention of ending his life. Despite this, Jae-hwan refused to lose hope, no matter how many days or even years it might take. Meanwhile, the devil, growing anxious, was biting his nails in frustration. He knew that Jae-hwan was no ordinary product, and this was the reason for his unease. Jae-hwan, as a product, was unique, something the devil had never encountered before. A cultivator's role was to ensure that a product would successfully adapt to the almighty land. By using a secondary process, they helped refine and develop these products. The primary method involved culling out undesirable seeds, leaving only the good ones, which was exactly what the tutorial game had done, sifting through to find valuable products. These selected products would then grow and thrive during the actual game. The secondary process involved nurturing the chosen seeds with water and fertilizer to prepare them for the next stage. However, if a product refused to progress, they would simply kill it, closing their eyes to it. The user's soul wouldn't be destroyed upon death in the tower, but the devil was concerned that Jae-hwan's soul would be damaged due to the vast difference between them. This worried the devil, especially since he knew that the harvesters would not sit still if they found out about this. The devil had intended to raise Jaehwan properly and sell him, as it was his time to rise to a high-ranking devil. Moreover, the devil had to repay the loan he had taken to purchase this tower, and Jaehwan was such a rare product that even the gods, who typically didn't involve themselves with devils, had reached out to him. Suddenly, Jaehwan launched a surprise attack on the devil, who groaned in frustration, muttering that this was starting to wear him thin. The devil casually blocked the assault with one hand, looking at Jaehwan with a mix of irritation and curiosity. He asked what Jaehwan wanted, clearly believing that he must have some reason for acting so recklessly. "Aren't you tired of this already?" the devil questioned, pointing out that things would have gone differently if Jaehwan had only listened and entered the real game. In his world, people would have said what's good for the goose is good for the gander, so why was Jaehwan behaving this way? With a flick of his finger, the devil conjured a glass-like barrier between them, his fury growing. He demanded to know if Jaehwan was serious about this fight. Jaehwan, momentarily stunned, noticed the devil's reflection appear behind him, forcing him to grip his sword tightly and whirl around to strike. But before his blade could connect, he was thrown back violently, crashing into the glass wall and coughing up blood. The devil, now enraged, grabbed Jaehwan by the throat and, despite his anger, calmly asked again what exactly he wanted. The devil even offered hidden skills, powerful items, anything Jaehwan desired. Yet, Jaehwan remained resolute. He bluntly declared that he was going to take down the devil and move to the next floor. The devil could hardly believe that Jaehwan was still clinging to that notion. He asked, bewildered, what it would take to make Jaehwan see sense and just move on to the actual game. Jaehwan, though battered, smirked, pleased that he had pushed the devil this far. He finally spoke, saying he had one last question for the devil. The devil, almost exhausted from this conversation, sighed and told Jaehwan not to be shocked by the answer. The truth, he said, was that this universe wasn't confined to a single dimension. Jaehwan simply nodded, revealing that he already knew, as this was common knowledge. The devil, taken aback, stared at Jaehwan with newfound surprise, wondering if Jaehwan had some background in science or had learned more than he had let on. The protagonist calmly mentioned that concepts like parallel universes and the multiverse were well known even on Earth. This prompted the devil to elaborate further, explaining that the main dimension was known as the Almighty Land. From that central dimension, countless alternate worlds branched off, with Earth being just one tiny planet within a vast dimensional system. He called Earth the 294th world, one of many scattered across these alternate realities. In the Tower of Nightmares, walkers could acquire skills, items, and work on their stats, allowing them to adapt to the laws of the Almighty Land. This, in turn, provided them the opportunity to travel to other worlds. The devil explained that his role was to facilitate this game, helping players grow stronger and move on to new dimensions. The protagonist pondered for a moment before asking why the devil was even doing this. What did he stand to gain from playing such a role? The devil, slightly surprised, found it hard to believe that this was what Jaehwan was truly curious about. With a snap of his fingers, they were suddenly transported outside the Tower of Nightmares, into a desolate, destroyed land. The devil smirked, guessing that Jaehwan might be wondering why the tower had appeared on his world in the first place. Jaehwan's curiosity deepened, and the devil could sense it. He revealed that out of the countless alternate worlds, it was mere coincidence that the Tower of Nightmares had descended upon Jaehwan's planet. The protagonist clenched his fist and said that was enough, he didn't need more details. He only wanted to understand why someone like the devil was overseeing the tower. The devil faltered, momentarily caught off guard. He hadn't expected Jaehwan to ask what he gained from operating the tower. Flustered, the devil tried to regain his composure as Jaehwan's persistent question left him momentarily speechless. The devil hesitated for a moment before offering an explanation that seemed less than genuine. He casually mentioned that his involvement in this process was a form of volunteer work that devils like him did from time to time. He hoped Jaehwan would buy into this, but judging by the protagonist's unimpressed expression, it was clear he wasn't convinced. Sensing the skepticism, the devil added that volunteering was something they greatly enjoyed, and many of his kind observed extraordinary walkers from various planets. He then mentioned a place called Paradise, where creatures such as monsters and devils lived harmoniously with humans. His tone was almost pleading as he spoke, a worried smile crossing his face, hoping his story would be accepted. However, the protagonist simply stared at him, seeing through the obvious lies. None of what the devil said seemed even remotely truthful. A few days earlier, Jaehwan had left the control room and reviewed his status. His level had reached 100, with every stat, agility, strength, health, willpower, and mana, maxed out. Despite that, he still couldn't defeat the devil. Frustrated, he drank a potion and lay down, contemplating why even with his abilities maxed, he couldn't overpower the devil. He assumed it must have something to do with this world system, where stats alone weren't enough for a human to defeat a demon. Suddenly, Jae-hwan felt something unfamiliar. It was a sensation he had never experienced before, and it caught him off guard. Looking around, he noticed countless golden particles floating in the air. At first, he thought he was hallucinating. He reached out, grasping a handful of the particles, feeling them shift in his palm. Sometimes they were smooth, almost delicate, and other times they were rough and jagged, like small crystals. Each time, they transformed, changing in structure and texture. In that moment, Jae-hwan instinctively realized that these particles must be the building blocks of this world. Now, as he observed the devil, he noticed words forming in the air above his head, revealing his thoughts. The words spoke of the monarch cultivating and gathering resources for the devil, and Jae-hwan was struck by how absurd the devil's talk of volunteer work truly was. Intrigued, Jae-hwan asked the devil about these masters and whether they were akin to kings. The question delighted the devil, who had finally sparked the protagonist's interest. The devil eagerly explained that the masters were powerful entities in the Great Realm. Those who completed the main game and ascended to that realm often received party recommendations from these masters. Jae-hwan, stunned by the concept of party recommendations, listened as the devil affirmed that the future of any successful player would depend on which master they chose to follow. The devil suddenly lunged at the protagonist, grabbing him tightly and babbling on, promising that if Jae-hwan followed his instructions, he swore on his demonic honor to ensure that Jae-hwan would end up with a powerful master. He even playfully poked Jae-hwan's cheek with a sharp nail, emphasizing that this would only happen if Jae-hwan willingly agreed to participate in the main game. The protagonist dryly commented that the devil sounded like a pushy salesman, catching the devil off guard. The devil, visibly puzzled, protested that he wasn't trying to sell anything. Despite the devil's odd behavior, Jae-hwan agreed to follow his lead, deciding to leave the place in 10 days. 9 days later, Jae-hwan was still diligently practicing his thrusts on training dummies, while the devil, sitting nearby, was becoming increasingly irritated. He muttered to himself about how tiresome it was to watch the protagonist go through the same repetitive motions. Yet, despite his frustration, the devil knew he had almost convinced Jae-hwan, so he forced himself to remain patient. The devil's irritation quickly shifted to rage as he remembered how he had been tricked into purchasing the cursed Tower of Nightmares. Angrily slamming his fist on the sofa, he cursed the dream demons for misleading him. He vividly recalled the day the dream demon pitched the tower to him, painting it as a masterpiece crafted by a high-ranking demon. The devil had been convinced it was a bargain, a rare opportunity to own a tower at such a low price. However, it turned out to be a disappointing relic, an outdated first-generation model. The newer, third-generation towers came with a feature that allowed owners to immediately stop the tutorial without damaging their products. The devil had only realized this flaw when he tried to relocate the participants, believing he had secured a premium product, only to discover there was no option to shut down the tutorial. He was furious, feeling cheated, and regretted ever trusting the dream demon. The devil cursed the outdated first-generation tower, frustrated that it required the product's consent to halt the game. While he desperately tried to manipulate Jae-hwan into agreeing to his offer, he grew increasingly anxious as Jae-hwan remained stubborn, insisting on fighting him instead. The devil lamented his poor fortune, muttering that this was the price he paid for being unable to afford a better tower. Still, what sustained him was the hope that, despite all its flaws, this tower would at least function as intended. All his worries, however, were supposed to end the next day, as Jae-hwan had promised to accept the offer after 10 days. When the day finally arrived, Jae-hwan received a series of notifications just before he was about to accept the invitation to join the main game. The system informed him about the Tree of Illusion, its roots, structure, and the different fruits it bore. He was also provided with crucial information about the Great Realm, explaining how it would enhance his adaptability and what he needed to know to become an adapted player. The system also outlined 12 key areas in the Great Realm he should visit, along with details about the monarch of the Great Realm and 101 reasons to journey there. Then, a new message appeared. The game master had decided to end the tutorial, offering Jae-hwan the chance to return to World 294. He could enter the main game with all his memories intact, and the system asked if he would accept this proposal. Devil Beastrain was elated. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the day Jae-hwan would finally accept his terms. The devil eagerly asked Jae-hwan if he had memorized all the information in the files he had sent. When Jae-hwan confirmed and even thanked him, the devil, overwhelmed with emotion, instructed him to press the accept button. He had anticipated this day for so long that he was taken aback by how sentimental he felt, nearly moved to tears. But just as everything seemed to be falling into place, Jae-hwan suddenly attacked the devil without warning. Furious, the devil demanded to know if Jae-hwan understood the gravity of what he was doing. Jae-hwan, unfazed, gripped his sword tightly and replied with a cold smirk, asking if it wasn't obvious. The protagonist firmly declared that from this moment on, he would relentlessly continue his attacks and immediately struck the devil once more. Ever since he began seeing the strange particles in the air, his senses had felt off, as though something new was awakening within him. Each time he lunged at the devil, he sensed a subtle shift. The devil, in response, attempted to grab him, but Jae-hwan swiftly severed his arm. Astonished, Jae-hwan marveled at the sensation of pain, almost reveling in the feeling of being alive. However, just as he was savoring the moment, a magical trap was triggered. Vines erupted from the ground, binding the protagonist. These vines were from the black ironwood of the 91st floor. As the devil began regenerating his severed arm, he remarked with a smirk that he had never encountered anyone quite like Jae-hwan before. He mused aloud, wondering why Jae-hwan hadn't acted this way from the start. It would have made things simpler for both of them. He then asked if Jae-hwan agreed. The protagonist, now entangled by the 91st floor vines, questioned what the devil intended to do next, knowing full well the game couldn't end without his consent. The devil, named Beast Rain, confirmed this, but confessed that he had long abandoned the idea of seeking Jae-hwan's approval. Instead, he had a question for the protagonist: why did Jae-hwan assume this tutorial game would last forever? The devil continued, revealing a crucial detail about the Nightmare Tower. If more than 100 days passed after completing the tutorial, the game would automatically terminate. This revelation caught Jae-hwan off guard. He had no prior knowledge of such a condition. Beast Rain explained that Jae-hwan would remain stuck in this place until it was time to start the main game. Jae-hwan gripped his sword, Beast Rain the demon, and asked with a piercing gaze, "Is it true that they call you the trickster in the Great Realm?" The devil was shocked by this unexpected question, but his astonishment deepened when Jae-hwan added, "You're 784 years old, and you've roamed 128 different worlds, cultivating various species in each one, like the wicked creature you are." Stunned, Beast Rain demanded to know how Jae-hwan had acquired such information. But Jae-hwan, undeterred, continued, stating that Jae-hwan would soon be handed over to the harvester known as the Master of Darkness, another revelation that left the devil deeply unsettled. The devil, growing increasingly anxious, began to wonder who Jae-hwan truly was, as the protagonist seemed to possess knowledge far beyond what he should. Little did Beast Rain know, the words revealing his true nature were visible above his head, and Jae-hwan was reading them with ease. The protagonist grinned, his eyes gleaming with confidence, and asked the devil, "Do you really know who I am?" He taunted Beast Rain, calling himself the very product the devil had been nurturing for decades within this twisted game. In an instant, a massive surge of energy erupted from Jae-hwan's body, shattering the grip of the black ironwood vines. As he stood free, Jae-hwan looked directly at the devil and declared with unwavering conviction, "I'm not your creation anymore." The protagonist's actions grew even more aggressive as he broke free from the clutches of the vines, immediately launching a fierce assault on the demon. Though the demon narrowly dodged the strikes, it became increasingly worried, noticing how swift and powerful Jae-hwan's movements had become. The demon retreated, only to be caught off guard when Jae-hwan managed to land a clean hit, severing part of its arm. Shocked, the demon struggled to comprehend how Jae-hwan had become so formidable so quickly. The demon started piecing together the clues, wondering aloud if Jae-hwan had somehow undergone an awakening. He glanced at Jae-hwan's sword, then at the wreckage of the vines strewn across the battlefield, and questioned whether the protagonist had become something more than an ordinary player, perhaps an over-adapted one. Ever since Jae-hwan had reached the 100th floor of the tower, he'd begun to suspect that the tower itself might be some kind of illusion. But as his battles continued, he grew convinced that perhaps the demon itself wasn't as invincible as it claimed to be. Despite his maxed-out stats, Jae-hwan had fought the demon over and over, believing that there was something more at play, something beyond sheer numbers. The very fabric of the world around them began to fray, revealing cracks in the reality of the tower. In that moment, Jae-hwan's understanding deepened, and without hesitation, he adjusted his fighting strategy. His strikes became more precise, calculated, each one carrying the weight of his newfound clarity. His relentless attacks enraged the demon, who, realizing that Jae-hwan had unlocked some hidden truth, screamed in fury. With Jae-hwan's new insight, the synchronization limit between him and the world had been momentarily lifted, allowing him to strike with even greater force. In response, the demon shed its human-like disguise and revealed its true form. The transformed demon lunged at Jae-hwan, promising that he would no longer be an easy target, and that resistance was futile. The beast slashed at the protagonist, landing several blows and leaving deep wounds. However, it was impressed. Jaehwan had already reached the second stage of adaptation, despite having only just completed the tutorial. The demon tore into Jaehwan with its razor-sharp claws, reminding him that he was merely human and couldn't possibly win against a being like Beast Rain. "You're fighting a losing battle," the demon taunted. Jaehwan shielded his face with his arm, his mind racing with thoughts of whether this could be the end. But his resolve hardened. He reached for the sword he'd earned after defeating the ice dragon on the 99th floor, gripping it tightly as his determination surged. Despite the pain and the demon's overwhelming power, Jaehwan decided that he would continue fighting, stabbing the beast over and over again, even as his body screamed in agony. With each stab, the number surged, pushing past the limits he thought he had. The demon, though wounded, sneered and said Jaehwan would have no choice but to play the main game sooner or later. "You're only hurting yourself by continuing this futile battle," the demon said mockingly. But Jaehwan ignored him, his only focus being to end the fight, no matter the cost. After what seemed like an eternity, Jaehwan finally struck the demon for the 10 billionth time. The sheer number shattered the boundaries of what any human could achieve, and with it, the very fabric of the world around him began to break apart. As the rules unraveled before his eyes, Jaehwan closed them for a moment, feeling half of his face illuminated by an inner light. With this newfound understanding, he realized he had transcended the limits imposed by the world and had become something more, an entity beyond definition. He had embraced oblivion and, for the first time, felt truly human. The mysteries that had haunted him began to fall into place. He recalled the bright line he had seen on the 98th and 99th floors and understood it now. It was a link, a tether that bound the demon to this cursed tower. Filled with newfound clarity, Jaehwan launched a vicious assault on the demon, who was equally eager to retaliate. In a flash of radiant energy, Jaehwan's attack struck true, much to the demon's shock. The immense power behind the blow was undeniable, and Beast Rain, now deeply wounded, could feel the protagonist's attack searing through his very core. The demon staggered and fell, confusion and fear written across his face as he looked up at Jaehwan, who stood over him, calm and resolute. Jaehwan told the demon to listen closely. As the demon lay there, Beast Rain began to wonder if Jaehwan had truly completed his awakening. But Jaehwan's voice cut through his thoughts, declaring that humans were not mere commodities for demons to barter and assess like products with price tags. Beast Rain, now reduced to a small, trembling creature crawling on the ground, was startled by the power and conviction in Jaehwan's words. Jaehwan's next statement was even more unsettling. He was done playing along with the demon's little game. He would destroy this place, break the chains of illusion, and move forward to whatever awaited beyond. As he spoke, the illusions Beast Rain had crafted to keep him trapped began to shatter one by one. Jaehwan proclaimed his intent to climb all the way to the top, to reach the end of this cursed world the demons had constructed. His determination was unshakable. As he spoke, his status screen appeared, but everything about him, his name, title, abilities, skills, and class, was now unidentified, a reflection of his transcendence. Watching his tower crumble around him, Beast Rain panicked. He pleaded with Jaehwan not to destroy it, claiming there was no next floor beyond this one. But Jaehwan calmly pointed his sword at the demon and informed him otherwise. There was indeed a next floor, one that Beast Rain was unaware of. He wasn't bound by the demon's limited understanding anymore. The revelation left the demon in a state of shock, powerless to stop what was coming. As Jaehwan ascended the tower, he noticed peculiar scribbles etched on various floors, the 78th, 66th, 47th, and many others throughout the structure. Each one seemed like a cryptic message, teasing at something greater. He realized that all nightmare towers, including this one, were mere imitations of the original nightmare, which sat at the top of the tree of illusion. These scattered writings piqued his curiosity, and he began to decipher their meaning, wondering what awaited him at the peak of the tree. His mind turned to Malak, the dream demon responsible for the creation of the nightmare tower. It was said that Malak's second creation was the Fortress of Regrets. Jaehwan speculated that these messages might have been left by Malak himself, as some kind of trail for those daring enough to follow. Turning to Beast Rain, Jaehwan asked if they were currently at the roots of the Tree of Illusion. The demon hesitated before asking what Jaehwan intended to do next. With a determined voice, Jaehwan declared that if these were indeed the roots, then there must be a trunk above them. He reasoned that by breaking through the ceiling, they could reach it. Without hesitation, he raised his sword and thrust through the ceiling, shattering the structure with a force that left the demon horrified. Beast Rain watched in disbelief as his carefully constructed tower, something he had worked so hard to maintain, crumbled before his eyes. Moments later, a system notification flashed, indicating that it was calculating the protagonist's tutorial game record. However, an unexpected error occurred, halting the process entirely. The calculation had failed. As the roof collapsed, the system began searching for any remaining walkers within the Nightmare Tower. Yet, no walkers were found. The system failed to complete the game properly, and with that, the tutorial abruptly ended. Suddenly, Jae-hwan found himself back in a dense forest, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. His body was drenched in sweat from the overwhelming heat. He stood still for a moment, trying to regain his composure, before spotting a trail of footprints leading deeper into the forest. Without a second thought, he followed the path, prepared for whatever lay ahead. Jae-hwan finally arrived at a clearing teeming with wild beasts, their predatory eyes locked onto him. They surrounded him, poised to strike. As the beasts lunged forward, Jae-hwan reacted swiftly, slicing one in half with a single, shallow stab. Yet, as he wiped the blood from his blade, he felt the ground tremble, a larger presence was closing in on him. He turned to see a massive creature looming over him, far more formidable than the others. Realizing that a mere shallow strike wouldn't suffice, Jae-hwan gripped his sword tightly and launched a powerful, deliberate attack. The blow landed cleanly, cutting through the beast's thick hide. He approached the fallen creature, grabbing hold of its horns and yanking them free. With a smirk, he muttered to himself that, despite its size, the creature was surprisingly fragile. His moment of triumph was interrupted by a voice behind him. "Are you human?" a figure asked. Jae-hwan turned to see a member of the Nakamyeong clan standing nearby. The clan member seemed astonished at Jae-hwan's feat, particularly at the sight of the precious horns he had taken from the five-horned beast. Jae-hwan, still wary, activated his suspicion ability but found he couldn't make sense of their strange language. Pointing to the horns, he asked the Nakamyeong warrior if they wanted them, offering to make a deal in exchange for information. However, instead of responding, the Nakamyeong clan member lunged at him with an unexpected strike. Jae-hwan dodged effortlessly and sneered, calling them antenna people. He warned them that if they tried to attack again, they would pay with their lives. But his words went unheard, and another assault came his way. With a quick parry, Jae-hwan coldly declared it was time for them to die. A short while later, Jae-hwan stood over the defeated Nakamyeong warriors, having swiftly subdued them. Grabbing one of them by its antenna, he demanded to know where they were. But the creature only responded in its bizarre, incomprehensible language. Jae-hwan tugged harder on the antenna, causing the creature to cry out in pain, yet still, the words that came from its mouth made no sense to him. The protagonist grew impatient, his grip tightening around the Nakamyeong clan member's antenna. "Say something I can understand," he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. The Nakamyeong warrior, however, spat out a defiant threat, vowing to kill him. In response, Jae-hwan tugged the antenna harder, causing the warrior to writhe in agony. Driven to desperation, the Nakamyeong clan member bit through his own tongue, spitting blood onto the ground. Jae-hwan observed the scene coldly. Though the Nakamyeong weren't physically strong, their willpower was far greater than he had anticipated. With no useful information obtained, Jae-hwan sighed and buried the antenna in the soil, leaving the fallen warrior behind. He glanced at the lifeless body and wondered if anything could still be useful. After a moment of contemplation, a notification appeared, alerting him to his acquisition of a small dimensional backpack. It was a welcome surprise, offering extra inventory space, up to 70 cubic feet to store items. Examining the pouch, Jae-hwan marveled at the practicality of having an inventory function again, especially after losing access to his system interface upon leaving the Nightmare Tower. At least now he had some way to manage and appraise items. Still, he couldn't help but feel betrayed by how unreliable the system had become. He had expected its functionality to extend to other dimensions, including the Great Realm. He placed the beast's horn inside the newly acquired backpack and tested the suspicion skill, finding it useful for identifying items. His attention was drawn to a cluster of crystals scattered across the ground. Using his suspicion ability, Jae-hwan discovered that these were stones of fallen souls, capable of enhancing an adapted player's mana reserves by a considerable amount. Intrigued, he bent down to examine them more closely. Each stone radiated a distinct color, but all shared a strange energy signature. Were these Nakamyeong clan members jewelers or something else entirely? Regardless of their origin, Jae-hwan knew the stones had value. He carefully packed them into his backpack, satisfied with his discovery and knowing they would likely prove useful in the future. The protagonist surveyed the remaining items scattered around, some of which were too bulky to carry. Deciding they weren't worth the trouble, he left them behind. Suddenly, his ice dragon sword began to hum and vibrate in his hand. Curious, he unsheathed the blade, which promptly opened its enormous maw and started devouring the leftover items. Jaehwan watched in amusement as the sword consumed its meal, idly wondering what those objects might taste like to the weapon. Amidst the leftovers, he spotted a map. Upon unfolding it, he saw it was a map of the Tree of Illusion Chaos. Confused by the term chaos, which hadn't been mentioned in the demon's files, he crumpled the map, lost in thought. Meanwhile, in a different part of the forest, a group of adventurers found themselves ambushed by a swarm of monsters. Among them, a girl hurled her sword toward a nearby beast. Unfortunately, her aim was off, and the weapon struck one of her comrades in the leg. Alarmed, she quickly apologized, explaining she had intended to hit the monster, but the sword had slipped. The injured man, though clearly in pain, managed a shaky smile and assured her it was fine, despite trembling as he painfully pulled the blade from his leg. Embarrassed, the girl announced she'd go hunting elsewhere, leaving the group behind. As soon as she was out of sight, the wounded man's forced patience turned to frustration, and he muttered under his breath, deciding to let it go just this once, partly because of how endearing she looked. However, he couldn't help but marvel at how she had managed to hit his knee with such precision. Moments later, the girl returned, looking apologetic once again. The team groaned, wondering what she had messed up this time, but their concern quickly turned to alarm. A massive, two-horned beast was charging toward them in a fury, evidently enraged by something she had done. As the creature closed in, the adventurers frantically shouted for her to stay away, not wanting to become collateral damage from another one of her blunders. The group of adventurers stood in a tense huddle, trying to figure out how to deal with the looming threat. One of them suggested they group together and face the beast as a unit. From atop a nearby cliff, the protagonist observed the scene below, noticing that the girl seemed to be the strongest among them, despite their apparent lack of coordination. He couldn't help but wonder if there was some tension between them. Realizing that they were no match for the creature and would likely be slaughtered at this rate, he mused over how they even managed to survive the Nightmare Tower in the first place. Down below, a red-haired man activated his skill, Fire King's Breath, and braced himself for the monster's attack, taunting the two-horned beast to come at him. The girl, attempting to assist, misfired her weapon, grazing his ear and causing him to shout in pain. She laughed nervously, apologizing, but the red-haired man cursed at her in frustration, calling her reckless. She looked downcast as he berated her, explaining that while she was trying to help, she wasn't making things better. He made it clear that he didn't need her assistance anymore, but before they could argue further, the beast closed in, its mouth wide open and ready to strike. Just then, the protagonist leaped from the cliff and charged at the monster. With a single, swift strike, he slayed the beast, blood splattering across the face of the red-haired man as the creature collapsed. Dust filled the air, obscuring the scene for a moment. When it settled, the group stared in awe at Jaehwan, standing atop the dead beast with his sword drawn. They were stunned, asking who he was and if he was sure he didn't want the beast's body as a reward, offering it to him for his help. Jaehwan casually replied that they could take the monster's body, asking if the horns were valuable. One of the team members confirmed that it usually took at least 10 people to bring down a two-horned beast, which made Jaehwan realize something. The creature he had killed earlier with just a basic stab had 5 horns, meaning the number of horns must be an indication of the beast's strength. The girl, biting her nail in thought, stepped forward and asked Jaehwan directly who he was. She pointed out that there were very few adapted players in all of Chaos, and it was almost unheard of for anyone to take down a two-horned beast with just a simple stab. Jaehwan looked at her, remaining silent as she continued to gaze at him in disbelief. The girl, still puzzled by Jaehwan's strength, couldn't resist her curiosity and asked him where he was from. "Is he from Chaos?" In response, Jaehwan turned to her and, with a calm expression, asked what Chaos was. This took her by surprise, and she stared at him in disbelief, wondering if he was being serious. As they continued their conversation, the group asked Jaehwan if he was just passing through, and he confirmed he was. The team leader found it odd that Jaehwan didn't seem to speak the local language and questioned him about it, to which Jaehwan admitted he didn't. This revelation baffled the leader, as language barriers were incredibly rare in this realm. When they asked if he didn't mind if they took the beast's body, Jaehwan simply nodded, allowing them to claim it. The girl, however, was clearly frustrated. She couldn't believe that someone just passing by had so effortlessly killed a two-horned beast without using any special skills. To satisfy her curiosity, she activated her detection skill, trying to gauge Jaehwan's abilities, but it failed. Stunned, she tried again, only to receive an error message. Her mind raced. How could this be? His level seemed as low as that of a non-adapted player, which only made her more suspicious of his true identity. Tapping Jaehwan on the shoulder, she leaned in and whispered that she had a question. She reminded him that adapted players were exceedingly rare in chaos and wanted to know how someone like him, who didn't appear to be adapted, could take down a two-horned beast with such ease. She pressed him, asking again who he really was and where he came from. Jae-hwan glanced at her, surprised to hear her mention chaos. He asked her about it, his tone genuine. The girl's expression shifted to one of anger, thinking he was mocking her. She demanded to know if he was playing some sort of joke. But Jae-hwan's face remained serious, and he calmly assured her that he wasn't kidding. She seemed frustrated, unable to comprehend why he would ask something so absurd. Assuming that perhaps the language barrier was causing confusion, she slowed down her speech and repeated her question about his identity. Jae-hwan took a moment to consider her words. Her question stirred memories of his past life on Earth, a life that now felt distant and irrelevant since entering the tower. The relationships, the sense of identity he once had, it had all faded away. Here, in the Nightmare Tower, he had forged new connections, created new memories, and his old life held little meaning now. Still, he remained quiet, reflecting on how far he had come, but all of it disappeared like a mirage the moment the tutorial ended. The companions who had fought alongside him were back on Earth, alive but likely with no memory of the tower. Starting over with their memories erased was the reward for completing the tutorial. Jae-hwan realized they probably wouldn't even remember him, nor anything that happened during their time in the tower. When the girl pressed him further, he told her that he'd lost his memory. At first, she felt sorry for him, thinking he was suffering from amnesia. But her sympathy quickly turned to frustration. "You expect me to believe that?" she snapped, clearly doubtful. Even if he insisted he had forgotten everything, she wasn't buying it. Jae-hwan had never claimed to have amnesia, but her assumption that his memory loss was the same irritated her. She ranted on, sarcastically comparing his story to something as outlandish as being an abyss warrior. Jae-hwan had no idea what that even meant. Then, without warning, his sword began to vibrate. The girl noticed and asked him to drop the act. When he drew the blade, it immediately grew larger, leaving her stunned. This was no ordinary weapon. It was a spirit sword. As the sword opened its mouth and began devouring the weapons scattered around them, the girl's initial shock turned into suspicion. Maybe Jae-hwan wasn't as strong as he seemed, perhaps his power came entirely from his weapon. Her thoughts raced, wondering what he was planning by revealing his spirit sword so openly. The other team members were equally shocked, watching in awe as the blade consumed everything from swords to armor. Meanwhile, Jae-hwan seemed lost in his own thoughts, calmly telling the sword to revert to its case form once it had eaten enough. The girl couldn't believe what had just happened. He had ruined her mission by eliminating the monster so easily. Annoyed, but with an idea forming in her mind, she wondered how she might turn this unexpected development to her advantage. She agreed to drop the subject of his past but slyly proposed a deal, a subtle trap woven into her words. After giving a brief overview of the Chaos Realm, the girl, who introduced herself as Mino, shifted the conversation to the group she was traveling with. She explained that they were members of the Red Fox clan, a notorious bunch of thugs. The protagonist quickly understood that Mino wanted him to eliminate them for her. With a sly smile, she hinted that they'd eventually turn on him anyway, so it was in his best interest to deal with them first. "Just don't stare at them too long," she advised casually. Later that night, the group's leader suggested they stop and set up camp, as traveling after dark could disturb the horned beasts. One of their scouts was perched in a tree, keeping watch while the others gathered around the fire, enjoying each other's company. The protagonist, lying a little distance away, was aware that there was a village nearby, as indicated by the map he'd found earlier. As he played with the tiny particles of mana floating in the air, he thought about how to approach the situation. As he listened to the group gossiping, he overheard them discussing his mana levels. One of them remarked that Jae-hwan's mana was pitiful, barely on par with that of a non-adapted player. The leader agreed, speculating that the only reason Jae-hwan had been able to defeat the two-horned beast was thanks to his spirit weapon. They continued, talking about how obtaining a spirit weapon usually involved venturing into the abyss, the branches of the Tree of Illusion. Jae-hwan couldn't help but smirk at their ignorance. They had no idea that he had acquired his spirit sword not from the abyss, but from the roots of the tree itself. It amused him to think how surprised they'd be if they knew the truth. He also recalled what the demon had told him earlier, that tower gear wasn't flawless. No one in their right mind would covet something like this, at least, that's what the demon thought. Quietly, Jae-hwan mulled over Mino's offer and the group's underestimation of him, preparing himself for what was to come. That's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. We'll see you in the next one.